All right, welcome back to Hoop Hierarchy. This is KC coming to you with the next video in the ranking all number one overall picks by their careers video series. So, if you guys have not seen any of the videos in this series before, welcome. If you have, glad to have you back. I'm just going to go back over kind of what this series is going to be about. So, the series is it's basically looking at the players that went number one overall in the NBA draft all the way back to the beginning of the draft and ranking them by how they lived up to the hype of being a number one overall pick throughout their career. It's not a deep dive into statistics or their play styles. It's kind of just covering their life and journey to the NBA, kind of a little bit of what they did in the league, and ranking them based off of that. And so the tiers are going to go as follows. An S tier is a elite Hall of Famer type player that exceeded expectations of being a number one overall pick. A tier is probably an all-star, more than likely a multiple-time all-star that kind of met the hype of being a number one overall pick. A B tier is an acceptable but a little bit of a letdown type of player. Like they were good, but they were not quite what you want to see with a number one pick. And a C is kind of like a solid role player type, but definitely a disappointment for a number one. And F is just bad or didn't play. Basically, F tier is a huge disappointment. So we're going to start off the video with the number one pick from 2001, Kwame Brown. So in the wise words of Stephen A. Smith, this man was a bona fide scrub. He can't play. But no. So anyone familiar with Kwame Brown knows his reputation already. As a senior in high school, he was heavily hyped. Many called him the best high school player in his class. He averaged 20 and 13 as a senior. And this was a time where drafting a player right out of high school was kind of really starting to catch on. He ended up going number one to the Wizards in what can only be considered a poor decision. He started out pretty rough in year one, but year two kind of showed some minor hits of potential. However, playing with Michael Jordan was never that easy for Kwame because Michael wasn't that confident in him. He initially wanted to trade Kwame for Elton Brand and gave Kwame a lot of tough love, so to speak, which Kwame did not respond all that well to. Amongst other things, the coinciding factors kind of caused a step back in production for Kwame. He got into it with teammates later in his Wizards career, and he got shipped off to L.A. He had hints of potential for L.A. here and there, but injuries kind of got him in a constant rotation with the young Andrew Bynum, and he never panned out. Kwame refutes the bust label personally, but he is unfortunately the definition of a bust. Kwame is going to go into the F tier. So next up is Yao Ming. So Yao is one of the most interesting cases in sports. He was quite literally bred to be great. For people who don't know, both of his parents were over 6 feet tall and were selectively put together in a relationship by the Chinese to create a basketball player. Yao was incredibly large even at birth and was from the beginning put in a vigorous training regimen to try to get him to be as dominant as possible. There was also talk that he was given hormones to make him taller and larger than he already was. But anyway, Yao was very successful as a young basketball player in the Chinese league. And he became a surefire best prospect for the draft based on his size and his skill. The only thing holding up that possibility of him was going number one was the concern that maybe the Chinese government wouldn't let him play. They ended up giving him permission to play, and the rest is pretty much history. Yao showed great promise his first year. By the time he hit his prime, he was averaging 25, 10, and 2 blocks. The only criticism of Yao is his injury proneness. Even at his best, he missed a lot of games. He retired early due to injuries, but that doesn't change the fact that he's a huge culture icon and was quite the player during his prime. I'm going to say A tier for Yao because while his prime wasn't long enough to put him in S tier, he was still great, and I think it's hard to say that he was a disappointment. I think he was a good pick. So next up, we have LeBron James. So, as if there was any question where LeBron's going to go, I'm just going to put him there right now. He's the most high prospect since 2000, and the most high prospect in my lifetime, and he still vastly outperformed expectations on that. As a young player for St. Vincent St. Mary's, he was national news every single time he played. Most of his games were televised, and he was being called the chosen one while still in high school. I think his resume speaks for itself. 4-time MVP, 4-time champion, 4-time Finals MVP, 19-time All-Star, scoring leader, all the while redefining how we look at longevity in the NBA, a complete freak of nature in all different aspects of the game, and the only player that has ever played who has a legitimate argument with Jordan for the true GOAT throne. Next up, we have Dwight Howard. So, for playing not that long ago, people have really neglected to appreciate Dwight Howard pretty quickly. Dwight was unreal for multiple years during his prime and was without question the best center in the NBA for a short period of time during the early 2010s. He was absurd in high school. His senior year, he averaged 25, 18, and 8 blocks. He was pretty much unanimously considered the best player in high school and came straight into the NBA from there as the number 1 overall pick. It was pretty rare to see immediate success with players who came straight out of high school ranks, unless they were LeBron James, but Dwight actually did pretty well on that front. He averaged 12 and 10 as a rookie, and then over the next couple years continued to build on that and turned into a 20 and 15 guy, averaging over 2 blocks a game as well. He was probably the last true back-to-the-basket traditional big that was a superstar. He was great. I do not, however, think he's on the same tier as LeBron. I think him being on a tier with Yao is more accurate. He's great, but not an all-time great. So I'm going to say A tier for Dwight Howard. Next up, we have Andrew Bogut. So this one is kind of interesting. I was kind of unsure on this one. Bogut was by no means trash. He definitely was not worth the number 1 pick, though. He grew up in Australia, being the parents of Croatian immigrants. As a young player, he was cut from the local team he was on, which he used as motivation, and eventually made it all the way to the Australian under-19 national team and led them to the 2003 FIBA U19 World Cup, averaging 26 and 17 along the way. Due to his significant success and his growth, he earned a scholarship to Utah to play basketball, where he was productive from the start. He averaged 12 and 10 as a freshman. He continued to improve to the point where he became the Naismith Player of the Year the next year, and he averaged 20 and 12 as a sophomore. This motivated the Milwaukee Bucks to take him number 1, and he became a solid player for them. But that's just about it. Just a solid player. To be fair, I mean, he did make the All-NBA third team one season, which was his best season, averaging 16, 10, and 2. So he was a good starter. He probably is more notable for the great role he played on the Warriors. He helped them win a championship in 2014-15, and he was really a big part of that team, even if he didn't put up numbers. It's weird with Bogut because I would have never pictured him as the type of guy you take number 1, but be that as it may, he was taken number 1, and I was going to put him C tier, but the fact of the matter is he was an upper tier starting center for years and became quite the good role player in his later years due to his career success and productivity. I can say that he is probably a B tier guy. So Andrew Bogut is going to go B tier. So next up we have Andrea Bargnani. So if you look at his stats, you would be surprised. He had a season averaging over 20 points per game and multiple seasons averaging over 15. Yet he is considered a bust by most people. He was born in Italy, played in the EuroLeague and the LBA, which is the league in Italy. His numbers there were decent but unspectacular, averaging 11 points and 4 rebounds in the EuroLeague. Due to the fact that at the time, young players didn't really get that many minutes in that league, and the fact that he was a 7-foot mobile stretch big, teams really wanted the next Dirk, so based on those traits, he rose up draft boards and went number 1 to the Raptors. He needed a bit of an adjustment period when he first came into the league, but over time, his rookie year, he seemed to show some signs of potentially reaching that lofty ceiling that was given to him, as he did make the All-Rookie First Team. He regressed in his second year, however, but then got a bit better the next few seasons. The Raptors traded Chris Bosh to the Heat, and he ended up becoming the best scorer on the Raptors at one point. However, he always kind of held the reputation of being a passive and injury-prone type player, and only had a couple of productive scoring seasons before really falling off. In my opinion, Bargnani is C tier. Yes, he scored a lot in a couple seasons, but that was kind of on a high-volume, bad team type situation. And he was, for the most part, a poor defender who had a short prime and could only just score a little bit without producing in other categories. I don't think he did enough over his career to be considered a B-tier player. So next up is Greg Oden, and Greg Oden's career is a bit of an unfortunate one. I really think he was actually a pretty good player when he was healthy. Problem is, he may have been the most injury-prone player of all time. He was born in Buffalo, New York, and then moved to Indiana at a young age. He formed a dynamic duo in high school with Mike Conley, where Oden won the Gatorade National Basketball Player of the Year award 2 times in a row, and then he and Conley both attended Ohio State. There, Oden showed what he could be against high-level college competition as he kind of took them all the way to the national championship game, going for 25, 12, and 4 blocks in a loss in that game. Basically, though, the success he had in college kind of leveraged him into the point to where he could get drafted over Kevin Durant. And when it comes to his NBA career, there really isn't even that much to say. It just barely happened. Like, when he got a rhythm going for a few games, he would just get hurt again and again. He started less than 70 games in his whole career and only played 3 separate seasons. I have to put Greg Oden F tier, but it's really not his fault. Injuries kind of betrayed what he could have been. Next up, we have Derrick Rose. So, another player like Greg Oden who had his fair share of knee issues. The difference between the two is Derrick was still healthy enough in his career to be a difference maker for a pretty long period of time. Derrick grew up in one of the roughest districts in the south side of Chicago. He gained an interest in basketball due to the fact that all his brothers played, but he became the best one out of all of them. His mom tried to keep him away from outside influence as she feared that people from the neighborhood would try to take advantage of him. And this turned out to be a good decision for Rose as he ended up pretty successful. But he ended up enrolling at Simeon in Chicago, and while not playing his freshman year due to the coach's rules on that team, he came out strong his sophomore year and carried that team all the way through his high school career, becoming one of the best prospects in the nation along the way and making a McDonald's All-American appearance. He went to Memphis. He was heavily recruited by Calipari. Coach Cal already had a good reputation for getting recruits to the pros, and Rose wanted to take advantage of that. Also wanting to be mentored by Rod Strickland, who was with Memphis at the time. Rose's career at Memphis was successful, but marred in controversy due to the fact that his SAT scores were invalidated, and the whole season was voided. Nevertheless, he made his way to the pros as a number 1 pick and was quite frankly phenomenal. In his first season, he won Rookie of the Year, and 2 years later won MVP, averaging 25 and 8. However, as pretty much everyone knows, Rose tore his ACL. That set off a chain of injuries that stopped his stardom in his tracks. This did not stop Rose, though, as he had a resurgence in Minnesota and Detroit in particular later in his career as a scoring role player. Rose is not an S-tier player, but he was great in the different roles he played, from a 6-man to an MVP. Derrick Rose is A-tier for me. Next up, we have Blake Griffin. So, Blake Griffin seems to me like he's going to end up being one of those guys that gets underrated over the span of time. Even now, it seems like most people only know him as a dunker, but in truth, he was actually just a great player. He played for his father in high school. He averaged 27 and 15 as a senior and was one of the highest-rated recruits in the country. He chose Oklahoma as his college, and his high-flying nature translated well to the college game. He stayed 2 years as he thought he could improve on his freshman season, and he did. He averaged 23 and 14 and won all the National Player of the Year awards. Then, going pro, he was not one of those guys who took a while to get going. He was pretty much an elite power forward from the beginning. He averaged 20 or more from his rookie season until about a decade later, except for one season where he was maybe at about 18-ish. And then he formed a fun and talented but underachieving Lob City Clippers team in his prime. Blake isn't a top tier player, but he was, really good for a decent period of time. So he is also going to go A tier for me. And finally, we have John Wall. So, John Wall is a lot like Griffin in my eyes when it comes to perception. Because of the lack of team success, he gets underrated by a lot of people. He was an insanely hyped prospect, but was by no means a major disappointment as a player. He grew up in North Carolina, initially was considered to be a player who was kind of hard to coach and had an attitude issue due to his father dying at a young age. But John Wall was able to overcome, become a solid leader in his high school days. He became a great floor general, and he averaged 29 and 8 as a senior. Then he went to Kentucky, becoming a member of a really talented Kentucky team with multiple pros. Played with DeMarcus Cousins, Eric Bledsoe, Patrick Patterson, Darius Miller, among others. Wall was easily the most hyped out of all those guys, though. He went number 1 to Washington. Like I mentioned, even in the absence of team success, he put up great numbers for the majority of his prime. He was close to a 20 and 10 assist guy, becoming a 5-time All-Star. He was never quite a superstar, but he was on the door of that for a while. So I'm going to say A tier for John Wall as well. So we have a lot of A tiers in this list, but I think they're mostly deserved. But anyway, that will conclude this video in the series. So I appreciate anyone who stuck around all the way through this video. There should be one more video in this series before we move on to a different video series. But like I said, I appreciate the support this channel's been getting. It means a lot, and I just want to keep it rolling as long as I can. If you guys have any ideas, go ahead and put them in the comment section. If you agree with anything I said in this list, put it in the comment section. If you disagree, comment. I always like to hear feedback on the videos. So with that being said, like and subscribe if you enjoyed this one, and I hope you did enjoy.